Welcome back to another FPL IQ video. Team guide pre-season is well underway. This one is about Brighton and Hove Albion. Will the Seagulls fly high or will they fall short? We're going to be looking at predicted lineup, how we think they're going to play and their setup, the strengths and weaknesses on the pitch as well as FPL, and our top picks and maybe even players to avoid from a much popular side. I'm joined again by teacher FPL Lucian. Good to have you again. Here we go. Brighton, a popular team, I think, in FPL, especially at the start of the season with a good, strong three opening fixtures. How are you today?
Excited to talk about this one because two missing key players here throws the market wide open to whoever that we feel will benefit from all of these absences. Really looking forward to discuss this because really it is anyone's game right now.
Yeah, so we'll go with the predicted lineup, and here when we talk about the pros and the cons of the players later on, you'll see there's a few slashes in this side about who is going to be nailed on. So we'll start in goal. I haven't got Sanchez on there because it feels like he's less out of favour, but we've got Steele or Verbruggen, the new young goalkeeper that they've brought in. Veltman at right back, Estupian at left, Duncan Webster in the middle. So it's a 4-2-3-1. Now, again, Caicedo, Pascal Gross. Is Caicedo going to stay? If he is, I think he's in the starting 11, but that's a big if because, you know, Arsenal wanted him for a long time, but now they've gone to Rice. Chelsea is supposed to be in for him. It's a little bit up there. I've got Dahoud in there, the player that they've brought in from Dortmund. I think he will go into that starting 11. And Cisco as the more attacking midfielder, who is a very, very nice price. March and Matoma on the wings. And again, down the middle, if he starts, he was in my first draft. Ferguson has all the tools to be a fantastic, really great player. João Pedro is not so much as a central striker, more of a maybe a winger or creative midfielder, but he can play in that role. It's just we're not certain. Again, this is pre-season. We're still waiting for the friendlies and the fixtures to see which players are going to come out and start the season. A strong 11, good, very good FPL prospects in this side. What do you make of the starting 11 here?
The formation is not as important as the mentality, simply because the left side of Brighton operates completely on a different wavelength compared to their right. As we know now, Brighton technically have a quote-unquote narrow formation on one side, where Mitoma, technically on the flanks, somehow drifts in narrowly depending on opposition, depending on which fullback he wants to take on, and that has allowed Estupiñán to score some crucial goals, particularly against sides that are better than them. At this stage, we can at least assume that the left side is rigid and the right side is fluid, because we have seen the likes of Solimarch and even Veltman bomb all the way into central midfield. That is how De Zerbi's side operates. So I do find, Rob, that we have to perhaps remind viewers that the usefulness of this video doesn't come in perhaps identifying the furthest player forward or even the most lethal finisher, but rather what to look out for in pre-season, so that as game week 1 rolls around, we are at least privy to what we want to look out for in game week 1, so that we know that we make an informed decision when to let go and when to buy a new player.
They are looking like they're going to be a stronger side with the signs that they've made, but when we talk about the weaknesses, there's potential loss of players and already loss of players. It's going to be interesting to see how they grow now with Robert De Zerbi, and he's got a lot of praise for how he's playing. This Brighton side is very young. Really young, so they're still developing, hopefully into better players. So they are certainly one of the most exciting teams to keep an eye on, not in terms of just FPL, but in terms of football in general. Looking into the strengths of this side, I've already mentioned at the start of this video, right at the top, great first 3 fixtures to start this season. So I always look at the first 8, but if you're just looking at the first 3 before you want to bounce off to somebody else, they do have... let me just find again. Luton at home, Wolves and West Ham in the first 3. And the first and the third game are at home. They are teams that you want to play at the start of the season, and you'll get a real sense of, are they going to be going up to that next level by, you know, really coming out and attacking these weaker oppositions, or do you think they're just going to settle on it? We're just going to have to wait and see. But in terms of a first 3 opening fixtures, they are absolutely plumb. So great prices for a top 8 team as well. They're all incredibly priced. They're still, you know, sub 7 million for a starting players in a team that were, so let's look at the defense. The defense was the 5th best for shots conceded, the 7th best for big chances conceded, 3rd for shots on target conceded, so they're not letting a lot happen there. And in attack, key players are usually nailed, the ones that you want, sort of the attacking midfielders and the wingers. The 1st for attempts in the box, Brighton, and they're 1st for total attempts, and 3rd for big chances, and 3rd for goals. So we are looking at a top 3 side that is not just having the attempts, but they're having attempts in the box, and they are having big chances. And they are top 3 for all sort of key metrics in terms of attack. So across the board, defensively, they're a top 6 side. In attack, they're posting top 3 numbers and top 1 in certain aspects. All around, it's an incredibly strong, young, exciting side. What do you make of the strengths of this Brighton team?
If there's one thing that Brighton are really, really good at compared to the rest of the league, is they punish flaws. I say this with a lot of heartbreak, as I remember watching them thrash Wolves 6-0 last season. For those who don't know, I'm probably the only Wolves fan in Malaysia right now. Yeah, it was so bad to the point where I just texted in one of my WhatsApp groups, "Oh, let this end 5-0, please," and they immediately scored the 6. They were just so ruthless in the first half itself that it's just impossible not to like them. They could bash your face in and you'd still fall in love with them because of how well they play. And they know that they have studied your side. From that perspective, I do feel that Brighton will require us to study the weaknesses of Luton, Wolves, and West Ham. And all 3 sides do have quite a lot of glaring weaknesses. and in that sense, Brighton are well equipped so long as nobody, there are no key attackers that get injured. The other thing that I'd like to say is De Zerbi has basically taken Graham Potter's approach and leveled it up a touch, in the sense that their one-touch passing from deep has done tremendously well. People who have followed my podcast from last season would know that De Zerbi has this particular passage of play that resembles a wall pass, essentially. And he calls it the De Zerbi-S, because one of the 2 defensive midfielders, all they have to do is drop deeper and play a 1-2 with either the centre-back or the full-back, or just a full-back that moves into midfield. And all of a sudden, Brighton outnumber their opponents in midfield and on the flanks. This transition, I do feel, will not feel the loss of the likes of Caicedo or whoever that they sell in this summer, because the concept is there and they don't require a type of player to do well in the most important decisions. And that's why they could handle the losses of Trossard and McAllister. I think they'll be absolutely fine without these players, because they don't revolve around 1 or 2 players to do things right.
Yeah, it's an entire system. Similar we've seen with a couple of other teams that they, like Brentford, they have a role to play and they play it to perfection. And I think you make a real key point. And another thing that makes you fall in love with Brighton as FPL assets as well as a footballing team is you said they don't stop. Now, there are some teams, again, we'll use Brentford as an example, and we said about Villa in the previous video about they'll get 1 or 2 in front and then they'll sit back, they'll consolidate the game and stay strong and structured. Brighton don't stop. If it's 3-0 and you've got Matoma, you're not like, oh, well, the 3-0 up, they're going to coast for the rest of the game and whatever. No. They're still going to try and get a 4th. They're still going to try and get a 5th. And that's a really great thing about this Brighton side. So many teams will just score a goal or 2 and then they'll take the points. Brighton don't change for no one, for no situation.
6-0.
This is how they play. This is what we do. Oh, it's 5-0. Sorry, it's 6. Right? And that's something that, you'll have, if it's with most teams, it's game management, and they still manage the game, but they just have the right idea of, well, we've been controlling this game and we're 3-0 up, why don't we just continue doing this rather than switching to a more relaxed or defensive or composed kind of manner. They just keep going 100%. Looking at the weakness, you've already sort of touched on, you don't think it'll potentially affect them, but again, I put as a weakness for my point the loss of McAllister. Now, I think Dahoud's the one who's going to come in, not as the attacking McAllister replacement, but when McAllister was a deeper, more playmaking player, that's the McAllister I think he's going to be replacing, because I think Enciso's the one who's going to be trusted to be the attacking version of McAllister. Potential loss of Caicedo, the already loss of McAllister, and where will João Pedro play? Will he fit in with this system? Will he mess it up a little bit? We're not too sure. Basically, they're the key weaknesses I've picked out with this side. Just the loss of play. McAllister and Caicedo have been huge to the success of Brighton. McAllister's already gone. Caicedo maybe. They are going to miss them. It's just if they can fill in with a correct player. But Brighton have a great history of losing a player or a manager and replacing them with some cheap person no one's heard of, and they've been fantastic, right? But any weaknesses that you have pointed out with this Brighton side?
I agree with you in some sense that McAllister's impact or lack of impact will be felt. And as you've rightly said, Enciso is already adjusting to the new role. It's more about the transition of roles for everyone else. That for me makes a lot more sense, because if, let's say, somebody that is an understudy comes in, Billy Gilmore is actually the first name that came to mind when I thought of replacing McAllister. He will do okay, and it's just a matter of how many games he took to come good. Same thing with Enciso, same thing with Mitoma when he first came in. Mitoma was not an instant impact, right? All of these players that eventually came good were not instant impacts. They came in and it took time. They relied on other players to carry them, such as Trossard, such as Gross, such as Lallana and Welbeck even at some stages. It all took time, even when the changes were made in-game. And I do find that, number one, when De Zerbi makes a new change, it will have some negative results. It will bring some negative results. I think it was this one game they lost to West Ham, or was it? Newcastle 5-1? Very, very convincingly. And it was because they tried to build their side around this 19-year-old Buonanotte.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the youngster was great. He did eventually score, I think, game week 37. That took time. And he will try to integrate other fringe players this season, such as Dennis Undav, such as Sarmiento, and they will feature. Almost certainly they will feature. It's just a matter of whether the likes of Tariq Lamptey, even at right back, completely alter the style that De Zerbi plays. That's all I can say at this stage, because I don't see it as a weakness to the side, but it's once again weakness in terms of what we perceive of the Brighton side. Because every time there is a new version of Brighton that pops up in the Premier League, we have to ask ourselves, is this a top 8 Brighton? Because they, as you said, right, they're already very young. They'll get younger and younger and younger. And we go, okay, is younger better? Is younger worse? We've seen young sides that fall completely flat, lose confidence, and then go on a spiraling downward run. Leeds, I believe, had that problem. I do feel that there's a bit of uncertainty, but in terms of our investment in Brighton, it really takes courage to have faith in new players that will eventually come in and become the new playmaker, the star of the show of the new system.
Yeah, it's tough. You're taking a leap of faith with players that you've not seen or come with a big name or reputation behind them. Like Enciso being 5.5 million, but he's $1 million cheaper than the other midfielders that you'd be looking at in Gross, March, and Mitoma, right? So it's the idea of you're not trusting a name, you're trusting a system, and hopefully the player who's playing in that system. So let's go on to our top 3 picks. My top 2 are not going to be a surprise. So the first one is Mitoma, 6.5 million. He's like 35% owned plus already. He's been in pretty much every single template draft that I've seen on Twitter. His run after the World Cup was crazy. Like you said, it takes time for a player sometimes to get used to a role, to get into the tactics of the side. But once he did, he lost a bit of steam towards the end of the season. But, he was playing like every single game and not getting rest when we thought he would. That might be worse now that they have Europe, but bringing in the likes of João Pedro and other players, he's not going to play every single game again. So I still think he's the top option at Brighton. He's 6.5 million, and those first 3 games are just an absolute dream. After a rested Matoma against those 3 sides, I think is top. Your first pick for this Brighton side?
Really, I do feel it comes down to how many Brighton players you own rather than which one you own.
Yeah.
I've gone with Pascal Gross. For the record, I do have Mitoma in my first draft still, but I would say that my first pick would be the top scorer of the tail end of last season, Pascal Gross, because as it stands, I feel that Brighton, I wouldn't say they would struggle, but at least they will take time before coming together with their new system without McAllister and without Caicedo. And it will take a few late winners. I don't believe they will hit the ground running until their starting 11 has been stabilized, especially if they try to integrate Dahoud from the get-go. This is where Pascal Gross comes in, because it was the exact same way they destroyed Manchester United. Oh, I love talking about destroying Manchester United. Every time Pascal Gross moves from the number 6 into the number 10 position, nobody notices. Doesn't matter if he does it as a DM, doesn't matter if he does it as a right back. Pascal Gross is somehow lethal and absolutely integral to the way Brighton break teams down. He was just as important for Graham Potter's 3-diamond-3 as he was with De Zerbi's 4-2-3-1. But really, it's just about making that difference early on. And I want to ask, if you were to own a Brighton player, would you rather have a player that does 6-7-6, or would you rather have like a 2-12-2?
Yeah,
Because
consistency, yeah.
yeah, I mean the nature of all these wingers and attacking midfielders, their returns by nature are so different as well that in the opening stages of the season, I would not like the pressure on me to let go of a player who has like 2 blanks but 1 haul. You know, I'm not that sort of player. My heart cannot take it. I'd rather have the guy like Solly March who's like, 5-2-5 or 6-2-6, that sort of thing. And I'll go like, okay, he's had 2 returns in 3 returns in 4. I'm actually perfectly happy with that considering his price. Yeah, I'm not the kind that would buy explosive cheap players at the beginning until they've established themselves after the transfer window closes.
Yeah,
So yes, Pascal Gross, first pick.
he was the top one by like 7 points, and that was just ahead of March. But I mean, he did play like 900 minutes more, so in a way, it sort of echoes the calls of Kane finishing just behind Haaland, right? But the fact that Kane played a lot more minutes, you don't care. You want those minutes, right? It means that there's more potential for points. So if you've got a player that gets 140 points and 100 minutes and 150 points and 200 minutes, I've got 10 more points than you. If my players played more, it doesn't matter. It just means I've got 10 more points than you have. Going on to my second pick, and we both have the same one for this. He's, I believe, the second most owned player in the game. 5 million at the back, Estupiñán. Just again, just like Matoma, he's been pretty much in every single draft I've seen online or on YouTube or whatever. He's over 50% owned. It's not a surprise. Anything you want to add about Estupiñán?
This one's tough because I've always wondered what Estupiñán would behave how he would behave when he's not playing in his best position, and he does that quite regularly for Ecuador. Is it Ecuador or is it Colombia? So he plays left back, but he basically is like the John Obi Mikel of that side. He plays basically as a number 10 internationally. I find that having that role sort of liberates him in the league, because he gets to showcase his ability from left back, his ball playing skills, his goal scoring skills even at some point. I do wonder whether people will be aware of his abilities next season, because last season we just went, who is this guy? People started calling him a stupid man. I mean, we just own him and we just left it, because at the time people were still debating between having him against Lewis Dunk. People still were in favor of Lewis Dunk at some points due to set pieces and bonus points and whatnot. And Estupiñán wasn't really established. I remember there were several times where he still got like 45-minute appearances. At this stage, if we assume that he's nailed, if we assume that he's a left back or a left wing back or whatever it is, what will his new role be with Mitoma ahead of him? especially if the left central midfielder is not Caicedo anymore. That, for me, really puts him up, at least in terms of competition against, your Man City midfielders, your Arsenal defenders. It's all there. The competition's all there. So if you don't want to own Estupinian after game week 3, it's a big question mark.
But again,
at least for me.
starting the season with him is not a big issue with those first 3 fixtures.
It's easy.
But our third picks are different. My pick is Ferguson, 6 million. I've already talked about him in this video. If he is that starting striker for Brighton, he would be my number 1 choice for Brighton because of the way that I want to play with 5 big players in midfield, and I just want a small striker next to my big Haaland, right? I'm not at the moment. I do have an 8 million forward next to Haaland, but I would just prefer to have a cheap forward and an expensive midfield. And his quality, he had some injuries which stopped his momentum, but he is a class player that does get results when he's on the pitch. And for 6 million, he could be fantastic if he is going to push on now and cement that place in the starting 11. Your third pick is a little bit different and will be different as well in our traps and avoids for this team, because your third choice is one that I would avoid. Who's your third pick?
Once again, it comes down to our interpretation of the manager's mentality. And it comes down to Jason Steele as the number 1 choice in goal for Brighton currently. I think, as it stands, picking a goalkeeper for clean sheet potential is incredibly difficult to do. And that's why I see that Luton, Wolves, West Ham run, right? And I see 2 clean sheets there, minimum. So for me, Estupinian's a must. And Jason Steele is basically a sign that you do not trust literally anyone else. And that's how I feel about it. That's why he's my third choice, because I balance that. I weigh that against owning 2 Brighton midfielders, or perhaps in your case, owning Ferguson and Mitoma from the get-go. I did consider that. I pushed Steele forward because, Ferguson has a lot of competition. At the same time, I don't see De Zerbi revolving his play around Evan Ferguson's talents as a 9.5, because Evan Ferguson is basically the young version of Harry Kane, but arguably a little bit sharper, a little bit quicker on the ball in terms of decision making. At this stage, I'd rather favor Brighton defensively. They'd probably grind out a couple of 1-0 wins, perhaps a late 1-0 wins as well. That's my personal opinion. I feel that Brighton do need time to get going. I have to reiterate that from the start. Really a word of caution. We love the fixtures, and I feel that we need to reap it defensively and play on the safe side rather than expect them to win 6-0 from the get-go again.
So we'll go to the ones that players maybe to potentially avoid, or traps a bit of a strong word, but ones to be wary about. And mine is Steele, and that is just because we don't know he's number 1. They've got 3 top goalkeepers for 4.5 million. You've got Steele, you've got Verbruggen, and you've got Sanchez is still there. We don't know if he's back in the fold or not. So for 4.5 million, and the problem that we've had is he has rotated his goalkeepers before. We have had situations where he said, okay, I'm going to have Sanchez for these 2 games, and then I'm going to have Steele for these 2 games. And unless you've got a 4.5 million backup, which a lot usually don't, we usually just have a 4 million hit and hope goalkeeper, you're going to be stuck, because at a moment's notice, De Zerbi might just turn around and say, I'm going to give Sanchez today's game, and then I'm going to play Steele in the cup, and then Verbruggen will play the next league game. We're waiting for pre-season, we're waiting for friendlies, but even after the friendlies, there is nothing to stop De Zerbi 5-10 games into the season saying, okay, now Steele's going to play the next 2, and then Sanchez is going to play the next 2. We just don't know. Your potential trap or player to avoid?
It will be impossible for Brighton to disappoint, if you ask me. I just find that most of our decisions with Brighton will come down to whether you aim for a value for money score, so to speak, or would you aim to hit ceilings and get players that have a very high likelihood of scoring screamers or things like that before the European schedule kicks in. I'm going to slightly go against my own advice here, but I do feel that Brighton players that are bought for clean sheets will basically imply that you risk losing out on the extremely high ceiling that some of their players have. I would say that, of course, with double game weeks last season that favored Brighton, we knew of their potential. But honestly, how many players can you think of that actually came close to 20 points when Brighton had a double game week? Almost none. They either most of them basically blanked the first, scored the second, or they had a dodgy assist for the first, and they came up with something mediocre in the second. Didn't matter whether it was Mitoma, McAllister, Evan Ferguson, Iwan Ferguson for the double game week. In the end, it just came down to Estupinian blowing Arsenal away with two goals and an assist or something like
It was
that.
horrible for me.
So yeah, something ridiculous, and that's how Brighton's points will come. That is how Brighton's points will come in the most unlikely circumstance when you've held them for 8 game weeks and then suddenly boom, they come with something huge. So don't settle for mediocrity with Brighton.
Yeah, Estupian, when you're saying about his attacking potential compared to like getting a defender for clean sheets, I think he's number 7 for Ecuador. So that just goes to show like they value sort of his attacking threat for the national side. So the last thing to talk about is the rating. I believe this is the only team in the Premier League that I have given a 10 out of 10 to, because there's not a player over 6.5 million. I discussed the stats earlier that the top 3 in terms of attacking key stat metrics, the top 8 in terms of defensive stat metrics. You can even argue that they're underpriced, the likes of Matoma. If Matoma came in at 7.5 million, I don't think anyone would have complained. The same for the likes of March. If Ferguson came in at 7, I don't think people would have complained. You could add another million to some of these players and people would still say, yeah, okay, I'll probably start the season with them. Out of 10, what do you think you'd give this squad?
Give them a 9.5 because they have some question marks that have yet to be resolved. After 4 game weeks in September, I'll give them a 10.
Yeah, I think you can't go wrong. You said it, like the trap for this side there's not really a trap if you choose one of the popular players. 6.5 million is literally the most you can spend on this team, and I just think that's fantastic. But that's our team guide for Brighton. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Let us know which 3 you think are the top Brighton choices. Also, who do you think is going to be the number 1 goalkeeper for Brighton? Join us next time when we're going to be looking at the Championship champions Burnley, and as always guys, have a good one.